name's Rechelle Leahy and I live in Armidale in New South Wales, the beautiful Anawong country. And my business is called Regional Collab. I've been running that for about 2 years now. And Regional Collab, the crux of what we do is about pulling together the power of regional Australia, rural, regional and remote Australia, and building projects that will see some social benefit or economic development for Triple R Australia. So our passion is around things like employment programs, for example, trying to get people back into work or trying to create programs to develop. Specifically, I have a focus on women, so developing women's skill sets to enable them to get back into work. Also, obviously, looking at what the kind of specific needs are in Triple R Australia. So we do a very place-based approach to the work and the projects and programs that we build. We don't kind of walk in and suggest that one size fits all. We try to learn about those communities that we're working within and what their specific needs are. So, you know, for example, some towns may have a huge shortage in childcare workers, but others may need aged care workers. There might not be enough teachers in another town. So we can't kind of walk in and assume that everyone needs the same thing. We also kind of manage within those programs what I often refer to as the layers of disadvantage in rural, regional and remote Australia. So obviously the further away we get from a city, unfortunately for rural Australians, we actually get sort of more difficult outcomes, especially around things like healthcare, for example. So the further away from a capital city we are, the lower our survival rates are with regards to diseases like cancer or diabetes or any of those sorts of diseases. So what we try to do with Regional Collab is go in and talk to the stakeholders, to the community, get to know on the ground what's going on at a grassroots level, and then work with them to build frameworks for programs and projects moving forward. So we work across all levels of government. We work with local, state and federal. And we also work with a lot of not-for-profits because there's a lot of really awesome people in Triple R Australia who are pulling together programs and projects to help their communities. So we kind of step in and help with that as well. We do a bit of grant funding, a bit of funding strategising, as obviously to get any projects off the ground you need funding. So we do a bit of work around that as well for people. Essentially, I came back to the country about 5 years ago. I came back because my husband and I had worked in Canberra for 20 odd years prior to that. And we had 2 young boys and decided to buy a hotel of all things and wanted to make a tree change. We came back and did that. And unfortunately, just after we purchased the hotel business, my husband got sick. He ended up with stage 4 colon cancer. And he subsequently passed away about a year ago. So what we decided to do when that all happened was to move back into Armidale, and I wanted to start looking at how I could stay here and raise the boys after he'd passed away. I wanted to give them a really lovely upbringing in the country. And there were jobs available, but they weren't necessarily my passion. And I'd spent so long in Canberra working in social policy, working in the Migration Review Tribunal, doing a lot of advocacy work for people. And I kind of went, you know what, I want to keep doing that. And part of the process of starting Regional Collab started with the advocacy work, helping my husband when he was really sick, because we didn't actually have access to the best healthcare that we could get for him in country Australia. We did have to travel 6 and 8 hours at a time to get back to Sydney or to go to Brisbane to get the kind of care that he needed through, oncology specialists and the like. So I guess the seed of Regional Collab started there because I understood from that very grassroots level what we needed and what we were missing. And I couldn't understand why I had to have lesser outcomes living in the country than people in the city. So that led me to joining the National Rural Women's Coalition, which was basically the start of my advocacy work. And then as a result of that, I started Regional Collab. About 18 months ago, I won a government contract with the Australian government, and that was for what was known as the Regional Employment Trials. And it was through the Regional Employment Trials that Regional Collab really kind of came to fruition, because doing that particular trial with the government, it was around seed funding employment projects and programs for rural, regional and remote Australia, specifically for this New England region that I live in. And what I saw was there are a huge amount of people with fantastic ideas, but they just couldn't get them off the ground. They didn't know how to do it. They didn't know how to build a project framework, and they didn't know where to start or how to get some funding to start, because a lot of these are obviously passion projects, but there's only so much that you can do without the funding to continue on and to make a program successful. So that was kind of the crux of, where Regional Collab started. And it was that passion behind the advocacy as well. So part of Regional Collab is I do a lot of advocacy work through my NRWC board director role. And that kind of, naturally feeds into what I do with Regional Collab as well, because I have a lot of clients who come to me and sort of say, I've got this problem in my region. I don't know where to start. Who do we talk to? How do we get things off the ground? For the last few years living here in Armidale, we'd gone through a terrible drought. I'm actually sitting here today talking to you and it's raining outside, which is such a delight. But we had a number of years of really, really bad drought. I have pictures of the front. I live on 20 acres out of town, and the front yard was dirt, like literally only 12 months ago, and now we actually have green grass. So it's really important, I think, for businesses like my own to actually be working on the ground in rural Australia so that we have that lived experience. I think that's what I find when I talk to government and develop policy and provide advice and do advocacy, is that a lot of people, they mean well, but they don't have the lived experience. They don't understand what it's like to be on the ground. They don't understand the daily stresses of looking out the front yard and having only dirt. They don't understand how that affects your mental health. They don't understand how that affects basic things. Like I'm out on 20 acres. I have tank water only. We got down to a position where I might have had to truck water in to keep us going. Thankfully, we managed to get through it okay because we had, extra sources of water. But that's the sort of stuff that they don't necessarily understand. Like just talking to people about, we have like a 2-minute shower, we have a timer in the shower, and we have buckets in the shower because that water needs to not be wasted and go down the drain. It needs to be reused. So I think that's really important that businesses like mine are out here in rural Australia, and that we have that real lived experience to explain back to government and so forth what the issues are. When I've been down to Canberra and have been doing advocacy work with the federal government, for example, we do a lot of work around, obviously, telecommunications. So I'm talking to you today on Zoom, which is fantastic. I'm really lucky because I actually have NBN satellite, which is working quite well today, thankfully. But sometimes it doesn't work so well, and that affects your business as well. So the connectivity piece is really important. And one of the best stories that I tell the government is, for example, they talk about MyGov, and MyGov is fantastic. You've got all your stuff in one place. You can go and look at your Centrelink stuff. You can look at your ATO, your superannuation, blah, blah, blah. But I say to them, look, MyGov's great, but you require 2-factor, identity authentication to get in there. I said, so I log in, and then you want to send me a message to authorise that I can get into MyGov. I said, do you understand that sometimes my mobile phone doesn't work as well as my computer does? So I might have to take my phone and run out to the gatepost or climb up the tank stand to get a bar of service to get that authentication code so I can come run back in, put it into the computer and hope that it hasn't timed out. And they sit there going, are you serious? I'm like, that's kind of how it works for us. We don't have natural connectivity. You can't assume that everyone has, fibre to the home. They just don't. So it's that kind of stuff that's really important for businesses like my own to be able to go back in and say, listen, we're not all made equal. So we need to do our best to fix that and to make it easier for people. Like we've said, connectivity absolutely is one of the big barriers. There's a multitude, that layer of disadvantage that I referred to earlier. So when you live in rural, regional and remote Australia, there's often assumptions made about being able to travel, for example. You have to have a vehicle, generally speaking, to be able to get stuff done, because we all don't live within, 5 minutes of where we need to go. We also don't have fantastic transportation systems. So we don't have huge amounts of bus routes. Some towns don't even have a taxi service. A lot of people assume that there's a taxi service in most rural towns, but there's absolutely not. So there's that kind of transportation barrier. And then there's what sort of flows on from that is the barrier to getting into education, because you need to travel to be able to do the education piece. Yes, we can go online and do education now, but again, that harks back to the connectivity issue. So it's kind of a circular thing that we're having to manage all the time. Other barriers to business, for example, are that there's an awful lot of programs. There's a fantastic amount of programs out there that is supplied by government or even not-for-profits or philanthropic organisations, but they're often place-based, so you have to actually be physically present. One of the things I have to say about COVID for rural, regional and remote Australia has been that people have actually recognised that we can now do what you and I are doing and talk through Zoom and actually work with people across that broad spectrum of rural, regional and remote Australia without having to have that face-to-face in-person contact. We can still do it with this video kind of thing. So that's actually helped us immeasurably, even though it's been a really difficult time and a horrible time for many people. So that's kind of taking some of that barrier away, which is actually really great because, we don't get the opportunity. We might see a fantastic program, but it's run in Sydney or it's run in Melbourne. And we can't get there because it costs a lot of money to grab a flight from Armidale down to Sydney. Or if I need to go to Melbourne, I need to fly Armidale to Sydney, Sydney to Melbourne. And that's a very expensive return trip just to go and do, a course. Yes, it might be great for my development in my business, but it's about balancing what that return on investment will be as well. So there's some of the barriers that we have when we're running businesses out here. More work has come our way because people have recognised that Zoom is a thing and I think it's going to stay a thing, which is fantastic. I've worked with a number of women in rural, regional and remote Australia in the last few years who've been building businesses themselves that basically focus on remote work. And it's been a real struggle for them initially to convince larger companies that you can hire someone like me, for example. If you need to have a policy written, I could do that because I have those skills. But because I'm not actually sitting in your office in Canberra or Sydney or Melbourne, you're not necessarily going to consider that, but now they can. So, for example, a project right now that I'm doing is writing procurement procedures with the State Emergency Service, who are based in Wollongong, but they've been working with me for about the last 12 months, and I've been writing lots of documents and that sort of stuff, and they're more than happy because they've seen I've got the skills, I can deliver the outcomes that they need, and it's easy to do. It's just we had to get through that barrier of sort of saying you don't actually have to be sitting in an office. You do have to have trust in the people that you're hiring, which has also been, something I think that people have finally come to terms with, because I get that, there'll be a handful of people that you hire that might not, provide the outcomes that you're after. They might not do everything that they say that they can do, and that's difficult and it does leave a bad taste in your mouth. But the majority of people are good people. They're people who want to finish a job. They obviously want to be paid for that job. So I guess that's kind of, for me, one of the benefits of what's happened out of understanding Zoom and being able to use that part of technology. Certainly, social media platforms have changed the face of business, I think across the board, but for rural, regional and remote, we can have a bigger voice. We can amplify our voices and we can connect with people from all over Australia, let alone all over the world. And so that has actually really been a huge way of expanding business, especially for myself. I've got my business, Regional Collab's a consultancy firm essentially, and I consult on various programs and projects, like I've said. But I've got 2,000 people following me on Instagram, which is kind of crazy to me because I'm just a little, just a small consultancy firm. But people connect with you and they want to learn from you. So you actually are able to amplify your voice and talk about the stuff that you're a specialist in. And then that builds into business sometimes. So those platforms have been really helpful as well. That's a really good question, and there's it's kind of a very long list to talk about there. But for women specifically in rural, regional and remote Australia, it comes back to those layers of disadvantage we've talked about. So again, coming back to connectivity, capacity to be able to travel to do training, availability of childcare so that you can actually spend the time to do the stuff that you need to do. All of those things kind of work together. The other thing with regards to barriers to entry are, again, like I said, the programs that are really place-based and you want to be a part of it, but you just can't. And also one of the things that I've noticed, and it's something that's been ticking around in the back of my head for a while, is around networking for rural, regional, remote women. So there's an awful lot of, networking opportunities in the city. And again, that's because you can, COVID aside, it's because you can actually get together in a place in Sydney or Melbourne or wherever, and you can talk to each other and you can connect and you can learn, and that sort of actually helps you to build your business, obviously. What's hard for rural, regional and remote women is that we're often so disparately spread out that it's really hard to do that networking piece. So that's ticked over in the back of my mind for quite some time, and I feel like we need to develop more of that kind of networking capacity for rural women, because it's in that networking that the business grows. It's in that networking that you find people who you might hire to do work for yourself, and they might hire you to do something for them as well. And without that kind of connectivity, it's very hard to continue building your business rurally. It's nice to have my consultancy business, but I can't rely just on people in Armidale to pay the bills. I need to take larger contracts. I need to have contracts, that can last throughout a 12-month period, so that I can actually have a pipeline and know what what money's coming in and how I'm going to manage that. And so that's some of the barrier stuff that I think we still need to address, as far as that sort of networking piece for women. We all have jobs, right? So we're all trying to run our business or have a job or whatever it is in rural, regional, remote Australia, but we're usually also spinning a whole bunch of plates, because we might have our own job, but we also might volunteer and run the school bus route, because if we don't run the school bus route, no kid will get to school. Or we might be part of the volunteer fire service because we're living in a rural community and you need to have someone on the ground who can manage the communications if a bushfire happens. Or, we might be doing the fundraising for the local preschool because the government hasn't given enough funding, to put the extra playground in, or to upgrade equipment or whatever that is. And so women have just this multitude of roles. It's not just the one thing. We don't just get up in the morning and go to work and that's the end of our focus. So I find that that's kind of taken for granted in the city as well, because there's more access, there's more capacity, there's more people. So obviously things just occur more easily than they can in the country. So I think that one of the things as far as networking goes is I have a little hashtag in my business I put up a lot, and I say collaboration over competition. I think the crux of everything that we do needs to be about collaboration, which is what my whole business being named Regional Collab is about. It's about me collaborating with other businesses and other people who have great project ideas to try to build that social and economic capital in rural, regional, remote Australia. I think it's just really important that there's more of that happening. I think we get stuck in that kind of, I have to own everything and I have to do everything, because otherwise how am I going to be successful or make enough money? And I think that when you broaden your horizons, when you work with other people and you open up to that collaboration, so much more can happen. It's amazing to me, since I've kind of taken that approach with my business, not trying to own the space. There's a lot of people who are in the same space that I am, but they have different focuses and different skills and different abilities. So if I get a program or a project, or, a government department comes to me and says, can you do X or Y? I love that I can go to other women's businesses, and I try to support women in business, obviously, because that's one of the passions that I have. But I love that I can go to those people and say, listen, I've got this opportunity. Do you want to come on board and collaborate with me? Because it will provide, not only more income for you, but it's also providing that networking opportunity. It's providing an introduction to whomever the person is that we're collaborating on a project with. So I think that that's one of the things that I find is really important. And I think it's probably, it's the same across, city businesses as well. But they probably do it a bit better because they can see each other and speak to each other and connect with each other. Whereas we do kind of sit in our silos, which, no pun intended, silos in rural Australia. But yeah, we are kind of siloed, and that's again coming back to the connection piece and the networking piece, and being able to actually work together and know what's going on out there. So it takes, for me, what I've kind of learned is it takes a lot of effort and energy, but it's absolutely worthwhile doing, and that is staying in touch with people and having these conversations with people like yourself and Sarah and so forth. if someone comes to you and saying yes to an opportunity and being able to learn from that. I think that's sort of what we need to do more of as well. The digital landscape has changed so much, like even in the last 10 years for me. And I've always been fairly computer literate, but, I've got a 10-year-old who's fantastic at using technology. I literally asked him to help me this morning. I was like, how do I stop this from doing this while I'm on the thing with the person? And, kids are just so far ahead as far as that stuff goes. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do better in rural Australia is actually continue that learning piece. So, you kind of learn to a particular thing. You're at university, for example, and you know how to use a computer and type up an essay or, do your research, whatever. And the internet's been amazing to be able to access everything, to the amount of information that you can access through the internet. Some fantastic opportunity. But yeah, the other side to that coin again is the connectivity piece. Making sure that we can actually access. So, I work with businesses on the ground, like I've said, in various rural communities, and I can travel from one place to another and have zero connectivity for a good 2-3 hours just because there's no cell tower, there's no data available for me. And so that makes it quite difficult as far as, being able to answer an email. We can put everything on our phones and talk to people and answer emails and do that sort of stuff. But if I don't have any service, I can't, sometimes I have to come back at the end of a day if I've been traveling and explain to people, I'm sorry, I've been out of service area. And they're kind of like, really? I'm like, yeah, depending on where I am, there's no capacity for me to actually communicate with you. I might be lucky to have 1 bar of service to be able to actually make a phone call, let alone do anything, online as far as the internet and that sort of stuff goes. But that being said, the availability of that, if we can continue increasing connectivity, making it easier to access. I know that I think it's NBN have started doing these like buses where they're traveling around into more rural, regional, remote areas so that you can actually kind of use it as a hub. Because in rural towns, a lot of the time, the best place to get connected is probably at the local library. That's probably where you're going to get your best connection opportunities. So these buses I saw recently through an NBN advertisement, and I kind of thought, oh, you know what, that's actually not a bad idea. And I think I'd read about them being used in rural America at some stage. So I think, that's a start. But, at the end of the day, I think we just need to work on making sure that all of Australia has connectivity so that we can continue building. Because, if a woman starts a business in a country town, the flow-on effects for economic development and social benefit are so huge compared to even in the city. It's just hard to explain that to people unless they can see, because if a woman can actually have a secondary income, say you're living on a farm and, you've been doing it tough during the drought, sometimes it's those women's businesses that help them survive. It means it's the difference between them having to walk off the farm and survive and be able to feed their kids during a really tough time on the farm. So it's so important to be able to have that access and capacity for rural, regional and remote women. This is all anecdotal. Obviously, I haven't done any sort of studies on this, but anecdotally seeing in the work that I've been doing in the last sort of 5 years since being back in the country full time, what I've noticed is that more and more women are willing to have a go. They're more willing to sort of go, you know what, I've got this skill set and I've been sitting idly on it. I think now with, digital opportunities and connectivity, people are actually going, you know what, I can actually take my skill set and do something with it, and I'm going to give it a go, because if I can earn an extra bit of income for the family, it's going to help. And like the extreme weather events, like you say, whether it's drought or whether we're dealing with bushfires, and now we've got COVID, that the rural, regional, remote Australia have had that triple whammy, like people in the city, I don't necessarily think they understand some of that hardship that we've gone through. And what it speaks to is the resilience of rural, regional and remote Australia. I think we're exceptionally resilient, and that's one of the things that makes us really successful business people as well, because you have tough times when you start a business. It's not all, roses and chocolates immediately, and you'll go through your ups and downs. And I think what we can do really well is use that resilience to keep pushing forward and to keep working and make our businesses work. But through National Rural Women's Coalition, we run a lot of free programs, so like e-skilling courses and e-leadership courses. And so those courses are around, improving your leadership skills and capacity, and improving your sort of self-esteem, and learning how to advocate for yourself and raise your voice and be heard and that sort of stuff, as well as the e-skilling. And the e-skilling we've kind of focused on to date has been around things like how to get on boards and how to run committees. We've done stuff around, financial security for women as well, which is a big thing. And that's where I think we're also seeing people going into their own businesses, because women have recognised that they need to have financial security, and that is also part of, their responsibility as a parent, as a mother, as a member of their local community. I think that, rural business is probably starting to have a bit of a renaissance right now, which has been really exciting to watch. There's some really amazing women out there with really fascinating businesses. I've watched women start up copywriting businesses. They've started up their own digital agencies. So, they're doing website and social media training, like we've talked about before as well. They're doing this, and they're all doing it from their farm. Like, they're literally sitting in their little office like me and, doing their stuff. And that's amazing and fantastic. And it's, again, it speaks to that piece about, if you can't travel, if you have to travel for, say, 2 hours to get to your local town where you might have a job sitting in an office, starting your own business and being able to do that from home just changes that ballpark immeasurably. When I first started out, it was overwhelming, to be honest. It was really overwhelming because there's so many different platforms, and you're sort of sitting there going, what platform do I use? All the platforms, how does this work? What do I need? So I did actually seek out some help. I've gone and had some other people, who are consultants, help me out with regards to, what do you think the best strategies are? So I have spent a little money around that myself, just so I could get my head around it, because I'm no digital technology, expert at all. In the end, what I have found is I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. Instagram has been quite amazing. It seems that that's where a lot of people are communicating at the moment. That's not to say that won't change in the future. And I also use LinkedIn. LinkedIn, obviously, more for that professional networking piece, and being able to describe exactly what my experience is and what my capacity is and how I can help people. LinkedIn seems to drive that kind of business and inquiry to me. Instagram is very much about me kind of marketing the business to people. So I have, like I've said, 2,000 odd followers for a little tiny consultancy, which is quite, outrageous in my head. But what I've got is, businesses, literally, not-for-profit organisations, agribusiness, businesses that are based rurally and regionally. I've got women who are startups who are, looking to try to get something off the ground, who are following me. And then I've got a whole bunch of like government departments and that kind of stuff as well. And so for me, that's really just, it's more of an advertising medium and a way for me to communicate and to express what my vision and values are with regards to the business. Whenever I talk to people about why do you follow me on my Instagram page, because it's still, like I say, it's fascinating to me, they all say, we like that we can see how you run your business and what you are passionate about. And we like to see the work that you're doing, because you're actually showing what you're doing on a daily basis. Facebook, I found, isn't actually so engaging for my business, but I know that if you develop more stuff within Facebook, like those communities, a lot of people use like a community page, so that then you can communicate with your people, and that's sort of the people who are interested in working with you and that sort of thing. I know that that's quite effective, but that's not something that I've actually followed up at this stage. But they're the three main platforms. I don't kind of jump on TikTok or do anything like that. I do video. I found that engaging through video. So last year I did a number of videos around grant writing and how to write a good grant application and that sort of stuff. And that actually hugely increased my profile, but it also increased the number of engagements that I was getting and people who were contacting me to do work with me. So I think that that's probably, and I was only talking to a friend the other day who's got their own consultancy business as well, and he's in the digital space, and he was saying, look, video is huge. Video is where people are connecting. And it's also because I know that I do it. If I see like a story come up on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever, and it says 2-minute read, I'll read it. If it says 7-minute read, I might put a tag on it. don't know if I'll get back to it. So I think the reason that video is so attractive is because I can talk and get my point across and can do it in like 2 minutes, and then you're done. So that's kind of really helpful as well. And the other thing is, that trick about kind of content stack, I suppose. What I mean by that is, you do a video, you can then get a transcript for the video, and then you can reuse that transcript in your social media. So you can put it up as an Instagram post, you can put it up as a Facebook post, and it just saves you time. So yeah, that's sort of some of the platforms that I use at the moment. I know that I still, and I think it's the same for a lot of people in business. You kind of get up there and you think, why do people want to hear from me? What's that about? And I get a little bit of that imposter syndrome too. Like, I know this stuff, but why would they want to listen to what I have to say? But what I've learned through the engagement of social media platforms is that, yeah, people don't know what they don't know, and they're really eager to learn, and you can provide that through these social media platforms. And so for me, it's some of the top tips are choose your platforms that you want to get involved with. And so, like I say, for me, I use Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, but there may be other things that work better for depending on what your business is. But the content stacking piece is a really good tip, because what is exhausting is trying to keep up with that posting across all of those social media platforms. It's, it can be a big job. It can be a job in itself. So for me, I actually break those kind of tasks down, and I have I've created a calendar for myself, and I know the sorts of stuff that I want to do each month as far as communicating to the people who are following the business. And that takes a lot of stress out of it, because, some days you wake up and you'll be like, I've just got nothing. I've got no words. I've got no inspiration. I don't know what I want to say here. But having a calendar helps me so I can just focus on what that thing is for that day. And I think also you can, use things like Hootsuite and stuff to schedule your social media posts, so that you're not actually spending all your time going in and out of every social media platform and trying to repeat what's being said and that kind of thing. Using tools like that are really important. I use other social, well, they're not social media, but I use other kind of digital platforms like Trello, for example. So Trello is a really great project management tool for me. And I use that with clients as well. So I'll share a Trello board with them, and we'll whack in all the information that we need if we're trying to build a framework or a program and going for a grant or something like that. So there's a lot of that kind of time management and project management stuff that I use as well that I find really beneficial. As a general rule, off-farm income has been exceptionally, it's grown hugely in, like I say, the last sort of 10 years. Previously, I think, the notion of off-farm income was more around investing in an asset. So, for example, a farmer might buy a shop, like a building in the local town, and rent that out, and so that was seen as off-farm income. But what we're actually seeing now, like I say, is more and more people are starting up another side hustle, for want of a better description. And so a lot of that, and sometimes I've got some connections who are like husband and wife teams, and they've both been in the agriculture industry for a long time, so they've started their own agribusiness consultancy firm, or they've come up with an innovative idea and they're trying to create an innovative product, and so doing that kind of startup piece as well as that sort of side business to the main agricultural entity if they've got a farm, beef, cattle, sheep, whatever that is. And so I think that's certainly been developing, and it's quite accepted. I don't think culturally there's sort of anything that's an issue there. If you go into the women's side of things, I think that there's still a lot of attitudes and cultural issues there. And that comes a lot from, the work that I do with the National Rural Women's Coalition. It comes a lot from just very traditional values and very traditional approaches to what farming used to be. And it always, pretty much used to be that you were a farmer's wife. And one of the stereotypes that we try to change with the National Rural Women's Coalition is we have a hashtag where we go, stop stereotyping, stop the stereotype. Because in rural, regional, remote Australia, we're so much more than farmers' wives. Where, like I said before, we could be volunteers with the local bushfire brigade. We could be raising funds for the local preschool. We could be running our own business. We could be working in town. we could be a teacher, a nurse, a doctor, a lawyer, whatever. There's so many different personas in rural, regional and remote Australia. We just need to stop stereotyping and assuming that all rural women are sitting on the farm making morning tea for their husbands, caring for the kids and, you know, doing the washing and whatever. It's a completely different scenario now. And because of the way that the agricultural industry has developed and because of looking at things like climate, as you've talked about, you know, extreme climate events and that sort of stuff, the planning and development of your agricultural business now compared to 20 years ago is just so vastly different. And I think that a lot of farming families and a lot of agricultural entities have actually recognised that we need to have other sources of income. You know, if we're going to have another 10-year drought, you can be working now, and I know a lot of farmers who are doing this, you can be working now to be growing your crops and, you know, storing your silage so that you've got enough feed to feed your cattle should you go into another dry period. But you can never store 10 years worth of dry feed. You know, you can't store your water to the extent that you'll guarantee that you'll be okay through another 10-year drought. So I think that what has been recognised is that, you know, climate is actually truly affecting what's going on the ground in agricultural Australia. And so those extra kind of businesses and extra income off farm is actually being developed. And we're seeing it being women who are developing those businesses because, you know, again, women sitting on farm, most of them have, I think we did a survey with the NRWC and we found that like over 85% of the women who actually connect with us, and we've got over 250,000 people who follow the NRWC, these over 80% of those women all had a degree. They were degree qualified in some way. Some of them were engineers and some of them were teachers and some of them were, you know, nurses or they were doctors. You know, I'm a lawyer, for example. You're sitting there going, right, so we've got a huge amount of untapped ability sitting on farms, and they're sitting on farms because, like we talked about, it's 2 or 3 hours to get to the local town and there's not really a job there that actually suits your skill set, and you don't necessarily want to be travelling for 2.5 hours to do 3 days a week because the amount of money you earn doing that versus the cost of your fuel doesn't make sense. Do you know what I mean? So I think that women have started building those businesses. There's still a traditional element to what goes on in the country, but I love, there's projects like, for example, the Visible Farmer, which is all about looking at women who are farming, you know, women who work with their husbands, alongside their husbands. They're not the farmer's wife, but they're in a partnership together running their agricultural entity. And that's an amazing program to kind of go and have a look at. And what's happening is you're seeing innovation too, because there's 2 heads instead of 1. All of a sudden you're seeing these amazing, innovative agricultural entities. You know, they might have always traditionally been beef producers, but then they've realised that they can actually sell their meat direct to the public. So they've started doing their own abattoir and butchering and, you know, have been able to create an extra income stream for themselves doing that. Or, you know, they've decided that they're going to look at, you know, growing chickens and having eggs and doing that sort of stuff on top of the beef farming. And, you know, so there's been some amazing stuff that's coming out of that kind of 2 heads is better than 1 piece as well, which I think is actually only going to be of more benefit to rural Australia. The reason Regional Collab came to be was because of the advocacy work. It was like a chicken and an egg, you know, which one came first, the advocacy or the idea about Regional Collab. But for me, the advocacy work, like I say, came from that lived experience of having my husband be really sick and us living in the country and not having access to the healthcare services that we needed. And what I realised was, like, you know, it was a really tough time when we were going through all of that. But what I realised at the time was, if this is happening to me, how many other people is this happening to? And where my passion came from was that I've always been a speaker. We're having a yabba today, and I love having a chat. I love putting a point across. You know, I studied law, was also, you know, really into debating at school and all that sort of stuff. And I kind of thought, you know, how are other people coping if they don't feel confident enough to speak up and to say, you know, this is a problem for me, or I need help, or where do I go to get help, and that sort of stuff. So I guess you know, that was the start of that advocacy piece for me. One of the things that I was a part of when Alistair was really unwell was we trialled medicinal cannabis, and we went on SBS Insight and we spoke there. Alistair was on the panel and I was in the audience, and we spoke about how we felt that medicinal cannabis should really be available in Australia because it had been used around the world. And was used as a really kind pain treatment for cancer patients. And Alistair had been on all of these horrible opioids and he absolutely hated it. And so we had become advocates for that. And I suppose what I learned through that was how important it was to be brave, to talk about an issue that, you know, in Australia, we were way behind the times. You know, Canada was way ahead of us. Israel was way ahead of us. Germany was way ahead of us. And I'm sitting here going, why? What is the problem here? I'm not suggesting that we all go out and smoke marijuana. What I'm suggesting is that this is a drug that can help cancer patients. We can make that drug. We can dispense it just the same way that we dispense any other drug that we use for pain-killing medications. Why aren't we doing it? What is our problem? And so, yeah, that's where I learned the basis of my advocacy. Be brave, speak up. Understand that some people aren't going to necessarily agree with you or understand what you're trying to put across, but just keep pushing, you know, and keep using your voice. And so I guess that for me is where I moved that into the work that I was doing with the National Rural Women's Coalition, and specifically about women, because, you know, once Alistair passed away, I became a widow. I had to buy a house for myself and my children. And I can tell you that one of the first things that was most difficult was I'd spent 20 years in Canberra and I'd had a really decent career and was earning really decent money. I went to the bank after he died and all of a sudden I was this high-risk person. Are you sure you can manage having the debt of a house by yourself? Are you sure you can do that and look after your children? How are you going to look after your children if you're at work? How are you paying for their childcare? They asked me all of these questions and I sat there and I was so ropeable. I was like, why am I a higher risk than maybe a man? I'm fairly certain that you wouldn't do this to a man. And it was that was the catalyst for me, where I went, you know what, this is not cool. You know, there for the grace of God, I might have ended up living in a bloody caravan with my kids if I couldn't have gotten, you know, a mortgage to buy a house and to keep moving forward. And it was at that point I kind of went, you know what, this is systemic inequality and inequity. That was really quite confronting. But it also, you know, was the thing where I kind of went, you know what, I'm going to start making a noise. I'm going to start talking about this stuff, and I'm going to start, you know, connecting with other women's alliances, because there's obviously strength in the numbers to talk to people. So, yeah, that's kind of the advocacy pieces where that all started, and then that developed obviously into the work that I do with Regional Collab. Because, yeah, you know, people come to me and they don't know what to do. They're kind of like, I'm really confused. How do I start this? I know it's a good idea, and I know that it can help my community, and I know that it can, you know, develop skills for young women, or can help young women not have to leave the country and go to the city and look for work, but they can stay here and they can develop themselves, but they just don't know where to start. So that was, you know, the catalyst for Regional Collab becoming what it did.